I'm smoking.
Gonna go.
Wait, let's do it.
No.
I'm not. I'm not.
Welcome back, team. It's great to see you. My name's Matt. We have James on the line and we have a very exciting guest. But before we introduce him, I'm going to introduce the topic. So today's topic is why bad habits strike during times of stress.
With us today, we've got Dr. Robi Sonderegger. And, you know, a number of years ago, I was sitting at home and I was scrolling through social media and I came across this guy that I saw was doing some pretty amazing work overseas, some pretty cool projects, including trauma rehabilitation and speaking around the world. And he was someone that was kind of inspiring to me. And I reached out to him and he was really generous enough to give me a bit of his time and meet with me when he was next in New Zealand. And since that time, I've been able to follow him as he continues to do some of these really cool new projects. And so awesome privilege for myself and really cool to have you along, Robbie.
Thank you so much. And I love the way, by the way, that you pronounce my name. Sounded like Schwarzenegger, Sonderegger. And I'll take Schwarzenegger, Sonderegger, whichever one, either works for me. But hey, great to be with you both, Matt and James. And hey, I look forward to getting stuck into this topic today. I reckon this is a good topic. It's not your normal, average, everyday, what do you do when you're in shutdown and lockdown? No, why do we do what we do when we're stressed in terms of habits? I think, hey, what a great topic. So thanks for having me.
So to get real deep and personal straight away, James and Robbie, what might be one of your unhelpful habits that strike during times of stress? So mine is I tend to go shopping when I'm hungry. Now that's never a good outcome because what you bring home probably isn't what I always need, you know.
Yeah, that's never good.
For me, it's my reflex to sugary food. You know, I'll start out the week with a good intention that, this week I'm going to eat a bit more healthy. You know, I'll be kind to myself, a bit more healthy. And then, morning tea at work and someone's made some baking without even thinking. If I've had a kind of a stressful day or sometimes I haven't had a stressful day and the thought just doesn't even cross my mind, my hand's on the croissant or that lamington before I even realize it.
So both of yours involves food in some way. I like that. I wish mine involved food. I think I've just got the food problem all the time. It doesn't matter if I'm stressed or not stressed. That's just that's just a no-brainer. It's a given. But I think, look, when I'm stressed, I'm a psychologist. I'm not allowed to be stressed. It's not in my job description. I rise above, or am I still human?
Cream of the crop.
No, actually, my challenge is pretty much exactly that. I work and I don't give up. And so, in other words, my stress usually surrounds work. It's usually time pressures and deadlines, and so I bunker down and I just work harder. And the thing is, I am able to keep it together in terms of attitude, disposition, eating no problem. But it takes a physical toll ultimately when you're just pounding the pavement and you refuse to give up despite the stress, despite the deadline. And so I think I do well to be a better listener to my body when it's trying to say, hey, like time for a break, like have a walk outside, get some vitamin D from the sunshine vitamin, and have a rest. It's okay. Have a drink, call up a friend, be social, all of the stuff that we know we should do for good mental health. But no, the deadline's due and I've got to get this done and I'm going to get it done.
That's interesting because we're talking about behaviors or habits that we might do. And I use the term bad habits there. But bad and good, how do we determine what might be good or bad or helpful, unhelpful?
It's a great question because really it's like negative and positive emotions. All emotions are just emotions. We classify them as being positive or negative based on their functionality. In other words, if it helps us function well, then it's great. great. If it's a helpful emotion, then we classify it as positive. If it's unhelpful and it's detracting from my ability to function, which basically translates to my ability to fulfill my responsibilities, get up on time, go to work, look after my kids, put food on the table, whatever it might be, tick the list. If it's starting to impede on my capacity to function on a daily basis, well, yeah, and then the wheels are starting to fall off the wagon. That's when it starts to create problems. That's when we classify it as bad or negative. Bad habit, it's functional or it's dysfunctional.
The downside of that is that when we do classify some things as bad or not good, and we put that weight on it or that judgment on it, often we can come away from doing those behaviors feeling pretty miserable about ourselves as well.
Yeah, and once shame kicks in, woohoo! It's like guilt next level. Guilt being, of course, where you feel bad for what you've done, but shame when you've repeated it several times. Now you're feeling bad for who you've become because you can't actually control yourself. You've lost that sense of discipline, and now we start beating ourselves up. And in simple language, if you beat yourself up for what you've kept on doing, you're only certainly assured to do it again and again and again. Habitual patterns are formed.
And that's a bit about what we're going to talk about today in terms of how it is and why it is that some of these habits are formed. And, maybe stepping back a little bit, could you tell me a little bit, Robbie, about, why it is that under stress, our brains start to make maybe worse decisions than if, it's a nice sunny day and the day's gone really well and, the kids have gone to bed quietly. During those times, things seem a little bit easier. It's easier to make good decisions for your long term. But why do you think it is that under stressful or distracting conditions that we struggle?
Well, it's really simple to answer that, and it's not necessarily what I think, but it's what we know about physiology. So that stress doesn't happen by itself. Stress is a combination of a variety of different things, so that there might be an incident, but the way in which I experience or process that incident mentally will then determine how I feel emotionally, which then will impact upon my physiology. And so if my sympathetic nervous system starts revving up, which is like the go pedal on the car, and I'm revving my engine, well, now because I've got heightened levels of emotion and physiology or stress hormones, I'm more likely to engage a poor decision because, as the saying goes, the higher my level of emotionality, the lower my level of intelligence. And so in some circles, it might be said stress makes you stupid, but that's not true because stress is not bad. It's when stress turns into distress that distress serves to disable you. And now we have a limited capacity to make wise decisions because logical and rational thinking has left the building and has been replaced by emotions. And now I'm governed by feelings. And so I'm going to be making decisions based on worry rather than wisdom.
It seems almost like there's, when you're talking about these, our ability to think and be wise in our decisions, and then our emotional side, it's almost like a seesaw where as your, emotions rise, as then your ability to think clearly and make better decisions seems to go down.
Yeah. I like the seesaw. That's good. That's a really good one, actually. It depends who's on the other end of the seesaw. If you guys are eating your donuts, then yeah, in Lamingtons. There you go.
So what is it about patterns of behavior or habits that are so appealing to humans? Maybe other mammals as well, animals, but what is it about habits or repeated behaviors? Why do we find ourselves continuing to do them?
Well, habits are great. Habits are actually efficient ways of being productive because it's not me intentionally, consciously engaging a behavior. It's me unconsciously engaging the behavior. And so if I don't have to go through the conscious pathway, well, then I'm on the highway. It's just a slipstream, smoother operation. I can do things, accomplish things by what we call second nature. Second nature is not necessarily always human nature, though. So it's a learned habitual pattern of behavior that I engage without even thinking. So I'm on autopilot. So it can be very functional. if of course it's a positive behavior or habit that I've engaged or learned or developed. But if it's a negative one and I'm engaging it without even thinking, then it's a little bit like, sitting down to the movie with a tray of chocolates and you think to yourself, yeah, look, this is such an expensive tray I got for my birthday and I want to keep it. Or it might even not have been my birthday. It might have been my wife's birthday. So look, I'm just going to have like one or maybe two. Okay, so maybe three at the most. But as you're watching, you're mindlessly eating. And before you know it, you're like, what have I done? And that's the moment that your wife walks in and says, you ate the entire box of chocolates? What's wrong with you? I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Maybe that's just me.
What can you tell me about self-control and that? Because, I suppose that the old school thinking was that you either had self-control or you had to get it. You had to learn to get it. And we all have good intentions. And sometimes those intentions change day to day. We set little micro goals for us, whether we're aware of them or not. But in the moment, our ability to be able to I suppose make the right decision can be harder depending on what's going on. Because you talked a little bit about automatic function, but sometimes we know that we shouldn't eat, that it's right in front of us, and we struggle with that willpower.
Yeah. Like every day. But look, the challenge that we have for ourselves when it comes to discipline is wrapped up in motivation as well. Like we can say, I want to do this, but really we have to, almost, give ourselves a checkup from the neck up to be able to evaluate, really? Like, do you really, really want this? Because a lot of people come into therapy and they want change. Well, at least that's what they say. But the reality is I'm really struggling in this area of my life. And what I really want is that I don't want this. And when we focus on what we don't want, as opposed to what we do want, well, there's a tug of war because they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So classically in psychology, we say, whatever you focus your attention on, you get more of. But the problem is if you're always focusing on what you don't want, you'll simply get more of what you don't want. So I don't want to eat this donut. This is not what I want to do. But because I'm focused on not eating this donut, what do? Well, I eat the donut because that's the thing I'm focused on not doing. And so I'll just do more of that behavior. And so we've really got to ask the question, so what does it actually look like to really want something? Faced with temptation and a will, what's the will really saying? Is it really something that I do want? Because if you look at New Year's resolutions, 9 times out of 10, I'll make a New Year's resolution about what I don't want. I'll look in front of the mirror, I'll rub my belly and I'll go, I can't have this anymore. I'm going to go on an awful, and then you say that terrible 4-letter word, diet. I'm going to go on a diet. That's it. I'm done. But what you're really saying is, I don't want this in my life anymore. But when we renew our mind and we actually start asking ourselves, now, what do I appreciate? What am I thankful for? What are the things that I'd actually like more of? I'd like more energy. I'd like more fashion. I'd like to fit in some better clothes. I want to look good in a bikini this summer, or whatever the positive outlook might be. When we start to renew our mind and focus on the things that are right and pure and good and just and praiseworthy, anything that I go, yeah, that makes me excited. Now I've got the fuel to go the distance. So we classically put it like this. Both types of motivation, negative and positive, are good. Negative motivation gets you to the starting line. It's what helps you make the New Year's resolution. But for 9 times out of 10, everyone listening will absolutely be able to put their hand up and go, yeah, because 2 weeks into January, I'd already bailed on my New Year's resolution. So why didn't I get there? I couldn't go the distance because I had the wrong type of motivation. So negative motivation gets you to the starting line, but it almost never helps you cross the finishing line. In order to do that, you've got to transition your motivation from negative to positive and actually start asking myself, what am I grateful for? What am I thankful for? What do I want more of in my life?
So running towards something as opposed to running from something, is that?
That's a nice way of putting it. I mean, we're running a race and we want to finish the race strong. And so we have to have our eyes fixed on the goal, not what I don't want. It's a little bit like stress. Stress can be categorized on a timeline. There are 3 types of stress. There's historical stress, current stress, and future stress. Historical stress is usually characterized by depression, and future stress is usually characterized, sorry, I didn't mean to, future stress is characterized by,
Give the person the finger.
Is characterized by worry, and the middle one is the contemporary stress that we're dealing with right in the here and now, the workload that we might have, and so on and so forth.
And our brain has the amazing ability to be able to put ourselves in a position where we can experience all of those stresses at the same time. We can sit there and ruminate on the past. We can sit there and worry about the future, all while struggling with the current circumstances that we're going through at the moment.
Triple whammy.
One of the things I was thinking about in terms of, why is it that it's so easy to go to, we talked about food, it might be alcohol, it might be drugs, it might be porn addiction, or it might be another sort of addiction, even if it's just, distraction through playing PlayStation for many, many hours. What do you think our brain's getting out of that? And can you talk a little bit about perhaps the role of reinforcement or reward in keeping our behaviors going?
Totally. Well, there's two sides of it. And the first is the lure or the pretext that we get caught up in, that we give into the temptation. And then there's the kickback for that when we've given into it. So the first is when we're stressed, or actually Dr. Gordon Brune, he's come up with a really great acronym. He calls it BLAST, B-L-A-S-T, that whenever your brain is going through B, boredom, L, loneliness, A, agitation, anxiety or anger, S is stress, and T is tiredness. All of these 5 different things are actually characterized in the limbic system, the emotional brain, as forms of pain. So it's not just physical pain, but these are different types of emotional pain. Now, it's interesting because the limbic system has 3 primary roles. One is survival. So, hey, it's a really important part of our brain. We can't just, cut the limbic system out and throw it away. We need it. Why? Because it helps process pain, and pain is a threat to our survival, and so it helps keep us alive. But it also processes the experience of pleasure, which is interesting because a lot of people think, well, surely they should be processed in different parts of the brain. But, like the divinals sing, there's a fine line between pleasure and pain. And so the fastest way to overcome our pain is to engage in some kind of pleasure. So whenever I'm feeling bored because there's nothing to do, and I click that link, or I go to the fridge and I'm standing there, I'm looking for some kind of pleasure to compensate for the pain. The problem now is the moment I give in to that pleasure, my limbic system quickly learns, hang on, this pleasure was amazing because it helped do away with the pain. It helped numb the pain. Even alcohol is just a form of liquid love trying to drown out the pain that we might be experiencing. And so the brain quickly learns, I need this pleasure. And that's why the moment you say, I'm going on and as we said before, the DIET word, the moment I'm going on a diet, that's the moment your brain rolls its sleeves up and says, over my dead body, I need this pleasure in order to survive. And so it's literally like your brain is fighting you now for survival.
And I think back to that idea that you had between emotions and thinking parts of your brain, and the limbic system being really that emotional part of your brain, and your thinking part of your brain being that more conscious frontal cortex, you might call it. And when stress is more around us, when we've got more things going on, where there's distraction and those sorts of things that are kind of pressing, when we have competing demands, it's harder to think of more the long term, this is what was best for me for the next 2 months or the next year. It's easier just to go, I just want to give in and get that some sort of satisfaction now, and let your emotions drive that automatic behavior, which is that give in without thinking through and going, actually, it's probably a better decision to not go there right now and choose something else.
Yeah, we're in coping mechanism. It's kind of a little bit like you're driving along and you've blown a tire. And so we're concerned now. The only thing we're concerned about is how do we not crash? And so, and so I'll engage in coping mechanisms that I think are best in the moment to be able to keep me from dying. I'm no longer thinking about the appointment that I have to arrive at in half an hour on time, for my job interview, without being lathered in sweat and, being frustrated, but arriving calm and cool. And that has disappeared from the equation. I am now just, how do I oversteer and use the handbrake and put on the hazard lights and let everyone know, warning, I'm in trouble, so as to not crash. But even though we've got coping mechanisms, of course, which can be functional or dysfunctional, as we've already discussed, we've also got to learn how to stop the vehicle and get out of the vehicle and actually change the tire and actually address the problem. And I think, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. I think in our day and age, we have such a focus on coping as opposed to intervention. So it's like, come along to therapy or take your medication because it will help you cope. It's a little bit like cold and flu medication, take your cold and flu medication so that you can go back to work. But there's a time to actually stop as well and recover from the flu. Do you see this in the clients that you work with and stuff?
Yeah, well, I see it in myself as well. Kind of on topic is my dad said something to me when I was maybe 12, 13, and he noticed that I always mowed the lawns listening to music or listening to something, and I was always on the go. And he said to me one day, you need to learn to be bored. And I thought, stuff you, Dad. No, I don't. But as I've gotten older, that memory for some reason has stuck with me. And I find it to be true. I need times where I can just rest and reset and not just cope, but just reevaluate. So stop what I'm doing, allow some boredom perhaps. But in the busyness of this life that we have, I know it's important to have some stop time.
That's really good. That's really good. And have you had some stop time since COVID has kicked in?
Luckily I have. But the temptation's there to always fill it with something else, right? But in terms of the clinic, James, what have you noticed in terms of that people wanting band-aids over a problem versus actually? Yeah,
I probably think about that more broadly than just the clinic, and just think about how the idea of well-being and the 5 quick tips. We've talked about tips even on this video series, and they're useful. But the danger there is that we're often looking for these quick strategies to help us get through. It's like looking for a magazine of the top 10 things. Actually, there's no top 5-minute tips to well-being. It's 5 tips. There might be 5 tips of practices, but those practices take effort, just like exercise does. It's pretty challenging, and sometimes the idea of coping maybe detracts from, hey, instead of having the energy drink to make you feel less tired, maybe we need to think about why you're actually tired and work on some of those fundamentals.
There is wisdom right there, James. I like it. That's good.
So, Robbie, then how do we actually develop these good habits? We've got great intentions right now while we're watching this video, but tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off, it's going to be harder. What are some of the things that can help us?
Yeah, winging a prayer, maybe. No, actually, we need magic. In all honesty, I reckon that we need to learn how to wave the magic wand a little bit, because magic is the answer. Let me explain it to you. You know how when a magician does their trick, they usually say a magic word like abracadabra or whatnot. But the most common magical word is actually the answer, and that word is ta-da. And I reckon that TADA is a great acronym to remember how to actually cultivate new healthy habits. So TADA would be spelled TDAR, and it represents each of the 4 steps that are required for habit formation. And the first is a trigger, that if we want to be intentional about cultivating something new, we have to bring it into our conscious awareness. because that's where it's going to start. It might end up at the subconscious domain, second nature, but we have to start by rigorous intentional training. So intentionality is the key. So whatever it is that I want to develop, I want to create a trigger for it. So I'm reminded, yes, this is my intention, and I'm going to now pursue this. D is whatever that trigger is, it has to cultivate some kind of desire on the inside, that I'm going to actually, let's flip it for a second. Think about a negative habit. You mentioned lamingtons before. I don't know what we would have the equivalent. I know Kiwis love it. Maybe the donut shop at the subway. You know, if you're on your way to work and you're walking past the donut shop and it's got that hot oil, cinnamon, sugar smell being pumped out, and you just like go, oh, that's the trigger for a desire, and the desire is the donut. And so what do? We act on it, which is the A in Tada. And I go up and I buy a donut, and now I get the reward of putting this thing in my mouth. But I'll also get the R result of actually, probably repeating this tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and therefore putting on kilos and so on and so forth. We call them COVID kilos. And so if that's the way a negative habit can be formed, well, why not use that exact same strategy for a positive habit? I need a trigger, I need a desire, I'm going to take action, and there's going to be some kind of reward mechanism. The only problem is that the reward mechanisms for positive habits are usually long-term and not necessarily short-term. So I'll get the short-term hit of enjoying the donut, but there's no short-term hit for eating broccoli. That's a bit of a long-term reward that I'll get from a slimmer, waistline, or a more healthy, vigorous body, or mind for that matter, cancer-free or whatever it might be. And so, so we've got to also build in intentional reward celebration points that I can actually get an immediate kick, so that I will do it again and again and again. Magic. Ta-da.
I like ta-da. And what it requires, though, is insight and a desire to think about some of the unhelpful things that might be happening.
Yes, and also intentionality around thinking about, what do I want? Not just what I don't want, but now what is it that I do want, remembering the positive motivation side of it to be able to help me go the distance. Negative gets me to the starting line, and positive helps me cross the finishing line.
Awesome. Well, Robbie, I've really enjoyed our chat, and I will remember Tada. That's a great acronym. That's really great. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to use that myself. So thank you so much. Yeah.
It's these acronyms, the reason why they're there is because they stick in our mind. They're sticky, aren't they? They help us to remember these things. And I suppose I just add to that of, or maybe summarize a little bit of what you've said in that, the same way that we kind of get in trouble with bad habits is the same way that we can kind of work towards creating new habits, and using something like Tada just to help us remind us to think about, what are these triggers, what are we getting out of this, and how can we reward this to keep it going, kind of demonstrates to me that Tada is the moment to get us on that reflection cycle, so that we're making better decisions. But it's going to take practice, and it does take time. But if we can stop, pause, take a breath, maybe take our foot off that gas pedal onto the brake a little bit, we're going to be in a better position to be able to do that. So I really appreciate some of these words of wisdom, Robbie. So thank you so much for coming along and talking to us today.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you, James and Matt, and cheering you on in these in your future interviews and discussions that you have. I think what you're doing is an amazing thing, and I hope lots of people are encouraged, inspired, learn lots, and transform lives.
Terrific.
Now, if you want to find out more about what Robbie is up to, or perhaps even contact him, you can go to peoplecare.global. The link will be right here. peoplecare.global. See you next time.
See you later.